Shavua Tov. As we complete our Pesach holiday, I want to address the story of the Exodus in perhaps a different way than we have sitting around our table at a seder last week. The story of Exodus begins with Moshe being appointed as God's interlocutor to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was likely seen as a god by the Egyptians for sure, but it was likely also that the Israelites at the time saw Pharaoh as a god. And here we have Moshe, this very humble person, the most humble person we ever know to have existed, is speaking, is the interlocutor between our God and the Egyptians' perceived God. The first time Moshe actually meets Pharaoh is down by the water. He's in the Nile. And Rashi tells us, quoting a Midrash in Shmot Rabbah, that indeed Moshe went to see Pharaoh in the Nile because that is where Pharaoh took care of his very earthly needs. Moshe literally caught Pharaoh with his pants down, proving to him that he was an earthly, not a heavenly being. We then turn to the plagues. The first plague, the Nile, where God smites the Nile, turns it into blood, teaches us that God was more powerful than the Egyptian God. The second plague, the plague of frogs, brings another two conflicts between two perceived gods, our God and the Egyptian cultic frog god. It turns out that there was a cultic practice in Egypt that worshipped frogs. It's reminiscent of Rabbi Akiva's Midrash, where he says that one frog came up onto the sides of the Nile, the banks of the Nile, and spewed out other frogs. Many of the rabbis said, Rabbi Akiva, stick to halacha. But it turns out that there was an Egyptian folktale that a great god would come and call to all the frogs in the rest of Egypt, and they would come to the Nile. We then turn to locusts and pestilence and insects, all attacking people and individuals and beasts and laying Egypt to ruins, laying it to total waste, destroying all the crops that Joseph, some 200 years prior, had actually saved. We come to this point where Egypt is in total ruins, it's totally laid to waste. And we come to the penultimate, the second to last plague, where God strikes out the sun. It seems that isn't such a bad idea, such a hard task to do after laying ruins to the rest of Egypt. But it turns out that this was the final blow to the Egyptians, because Ra, the sun god, was their most powerful god, and Pharaoh was considered to be that Ra. The final plague, where Pharaoh's son is killed as a firstborn, proves that this was a combat not between a god and another god, but between a god and the person. And the story of Exodus tells us that it's our God who is unique in the world and not any others. Shavua Tov.